Every tower in Bloons has a weakness, even the glue gunner, and we're going to cover them all today. The first one up is the Ultra Juggernaut, and this guy really struggles on wide open maps, especially when super ceramics are coming and there aren't many obstacles for him to bounce off of. Up next is the Plasma Monkey Fan Club, and its three weaknesses are its cost, how much space it takes up, and its ability cooldown. If you can get around these three things, it is a super good tower. Next up is the CROSBOW Master, and this guy really struggles against super ceramics and DDTs, so if you plan on going late with this guy, you better have another DPS option. Up fourth is the Glaive Lord, and whereas this guy is an absolute beast on single lane tracks, he really struggles on maps with multiple tracks, especially if there isn't a nice bend for him to be placed around. Up next is the Permacharge, and aside from its cost, it doesn't really have a weakness. I mean, this guy is probably the most well-rounded tower in the game. Number 6 is MOAB Domination, and whereas this guy is great at slowing down ZMGs and BFBs, he really struggles at cleaning up the super ceramics, dealing with DDTs and bads. Number 7 is a Bloon Crush, and whereas this guy is a beast at making everything come to a screeching halt, he really struggles against bads, and I have to hold his price tag against him. Next up, we have the MOAB Eliminator, and the real drawback to this guy is that First Strike and Spike Storm accomplish the same thing for less money. Number 9 is the Bomb Blitz, and this guy's weakness is that he requires a life to be lost in order to pop everything on the screen, and sometimes that isn't always an option. And on chimps, it's normally just better to get multiple recursive clusters. Number 10 is the Infernal Ring, and this guy is a very well-rounded tower, though his two biggest weaknesses are his huge price tag and his small attack range. Next up is the Super Maelstrom, whose biggest weakness is his placement, as he has to use his ability right as the MOABs are over him to do the most damage, meaning he really struggles on multi-lane tracks. Number 12 is the Tack Zone, which is an incredible tier 5 tower, especially for its price, but just like the other tack shooters, it really struggles with its attack range, and this guy also needs a MIB to be able to pop leads and DDTs. Super Brittle is up next and has two main weaknesses. The first is that its 40 pierce is not always enough in late game, and the other is its price. Now in free play and bosses, 30 grand is just fine, but it is hard to justify that price tag in a chimps game. Absolute Zero is a great stalling tower, but Bloon Impact and Bloon Sabotage replace most of its functionality for less money. Icicle Impale provides insane amounts of utility to any run, however, it does absolutely nothing to the bad on round 100. The Bloon Solver is an absolute beast, though its biggest weakness is that it's just outclassed by the biggest one, as they both excel in the same things. The Glue Storm is genuinely an amazing tower, though its biggest weakness is that it doesn't do much on its own, it just increases the damage that the Bloons take. Super Glue is awesome as it completely halts DDTs, though it is outclassed by Icicle Impale as that is cheaper and a little more flexible. Now we're on to the military monkeys, and we're starting with Cripple MOAB. This guy has the same problem that Super Brittle has in that he needs others to do the damage that he's providing support on, and he's just a little too expensive to fit into most chimps runs. At number 20, we have the Elite Sniper, and this guy is amazing for the mid game, however, he does struggle against Super Ceramics and MOABs in the late game. Number 21 is the Elite Defender, and although it is a super fun upgrade to get, you don't get all of its functionality unless you lose a life, which is not an option in chimps games, and it really struggles against Super Ceramics unless you have the Ceramic Shock Monkey knowledge. Next up, we have the Energizer Submarine, which is a super cool upgrade, however, it's just a little too expensive and niche for most chimps runs. Next up, we have the Preemptive Strike Submarine, which is weak to the ceramics coming out of MOABs, the fortified DDT is in around 99, and it has a huge price tag. Rounding out the submarines is the Sub Commander, and although it has an absolutely classic strat of spamming 203 subs, it does require a ton of water and they do fall off late game if not properly buffed. Number 25 is the Carrier Flagship, which is one of my favorite upgrades in the game, however it does fall off late game and its biggest problem is that you cannot buff the planes with the Alchemist. Next up we have the Pirate Lord, which is a super fun tower to use, however it does not generate any extra money in chimps and it has super weak damage outside of its ability, which has a moderate cooldown. Number 27 is the Trade Empire, and although this guy is an amazing farmer, his weakness is that it takes a ton of water to use him to his fullest potential. Number 28 is the Sky Shredder, and this guy is an absolute beast as he is used to beat chimps on even the hardest maps, however you won't get the most out of him unless you learn some flight microing. Number 29 is the Tsar Bomba, and his biggest weakness is that you have to spend all of your money on this guy, meaning that you better stall to make sure his ability is off cooldown. Next up, we have the Flying Fortress, and this one's pretty obvious, and that's its huge price tag. It's so high that it's really only useful if you farm incredibly hard for boss events or free play. Up next, we have the Apache Prime, who is an absolute beast. However, he has a huge price tag, and he really struggles against maps with multiple tracks, like most helicopters. Number 32 is Special Poperations, and this guy's biggest weakness is the weird build-up to it. The tier 4 is a support, and the tier 5 does damage. It's just weird, and you have to be super careful about the marine placement or else you're going to leak a ton of balloons. Next up is the Comanche Commander, and this guy's biggest weakness is that you can't buff the mini helis with the Alchemist anymore. Ever since that nerf, he has not been very good. Number 35 is the biggest one, and although this guy absolutely destroys super ceramics, he really struggles against MOAB class balloons if he's not on a map that has a bunch of loops for him to hit them multiple times. Next up is the Mortar Monkey, whose ability stuns and slows down MOAB class balloons. However, this ability cooldown is super long, and there are cheaper slowing options like Bloon Sabotage and MOAB Glue. Number 37 is the Bloon Incineration Mortar Monkey, and this guy's biggest weakness is that he oftentimes does not pop the super ceramics coming out of the MOABs, so you're going to need some cleanup at the end of the track to pick up these super ceramics. Moving on to the Ray of Doom, the obvious one is this guy's insane price tag, but other than that, he does not do very well against fortified DDTs or BADs. Next up, we have the MAD, and this guy struggles against anything but MOAB class balloons, which he specializes against. Up next is the Bloon Exclusion Zone, and just like the other Mortar Monkeys, this guy is way too expensive for most runs, but other than that, his biggest limiting factor is his Pierce, as each projectile only has 6, making him really struggle against the super dense packs of balloons coming in the later 90s. On to Magic Monkeys, the first one up is the Archmage, and this guy really struggles against the super ceramics coming out of DDTs and MOAB class balloons that he pops. Up next is the Wizard Lord Phoenix, and this guy's biggest weakness is how reliant he is on this ability, so you're going to need some pretty good stalls since the cooldown's pretty long. Number 43 is the Prince of Darkness, and this guy's biggest weakness is super long rounds like 97 and 100, as this will completely drain his graveyard, making him much worse. Up next, we're combining the True Sun God, the Anti-Balloon, and the Legend of the Night all into one, as they're all so expensive they're really only used in bosses and free play, and the final two are best used to make the VTSG. The Grandmaster Ninja can be a great tower in chimps. The only problem is you need to pair him with a ton of Shinobi Ninjas, which takes up so much space it's not viable in every game. Next up, we have the Grand Saboteur, whose ability is amazing. The problem is that it's more cost effective to buy several Bloon Sabotages in chimps runs. Number 47 is the Master Bomber, and just like the Grandmaster Ninja, he needs a ton of Shinobis to let him keep up with all the MOAB class balloons in the later 90s, so he needs a ton of space, which isn't always an option. Next up, we have the Permabrew Alchemist, and this is arguably the best buff in the game. However, it's way too expensive to get in most runs, and it does barely any damage on its own. Number 49 is Total Transformation, which is a very underused tower considering how good it is, though you do have to plan for which tier 3s you have to upgrade. You need a ton of space because you want to buff your towers, and then you also need to stall because the ability has a long cooldown. Up next, we have the Bloon Master Alchemist, whose biggest two weaknesses are destroying your eco as you only get money for the red balloon pops, and against bads as he does absolutely nothing against them. Next up, we have the Superstorm Druid, which has amazing stalling potential. However, he is crazy expensive and he absolutely sucks versus bads. Number 52 is the Spirit of the Force, and this guy is not good on shorter maps, and his ability to generate extra money does not work in chimps. Next up, we have the Avatar of Wrath, and this guy's main weakness is that he is dependent on external buffs like Stronger Stimulant, Oban, and other Pop Plus Druids, meaning you have to plan this from the beginning and you need a bit of space. Number 54, we are combining all the tier 5 banana farms, as they are just too expensive to get in your typical runs, and they don't work in chimps. However, they are very useful in free play and boss events. Up next, we have Super Mines, which is super expensive, and it also sometimes fails at killing groups of balloons since the massive explosions don't have the most pierce. Next up, we have the Carpet of Spikes, and his main weakness is that he wastes a lot of spikes on weaker balloons that he doesn't have to, and that it's normally better to go for several Spike Storms instead of this tier 5 upgrade. Next up, we have the Perma Spike Spectre, and this guy really struggles on maps with multiple tracks, and he needs some stallers so he can refill his pile every round. Number 58 is Primary Expertise, and the only weakness of this guy is how dependent he is on Cluster Bomb spam and MOAB Mauler spams, as well as the primary mentoring often being enough so this tier 5 isn't always needed. Next up, we have Call to Arms, with its big two weaknesses being how expensive it is and that it only has a 44% uptime on its ability. Number 60 is the Monkeyopolis, which is the best farming tower in the game. However, you need an absolute ton of space for this guy to be super effective, and you can't build him in chimps because you need a banana farm. Next, we have the Sentry Champion, whose biggest weakness is that you have to play on maps where sentries will be placed right next to the track so you can utilize their explosions for the most damage. Next up, we have the Ultra Boost Engineer, and his ability is absolutely insane. However, coming in at $129,000 on chimps is just way too expensive to be used in anything but free play and boss events. And finally, we have the XXXL Trap, who is not good on multi-lane tracks. He needs a ton of support to catch anything that gets through. He doesn't make any extra money in chimps, and you guessed it, he is super expensive. I wonder if they'd like to see me make a video about every hero's weakness in balloons.